Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. This week's episode of Real Talk MS is all about MS research. My guest on the podcast is Dr. Bruce Bebo, and Bruce is the Executive Vice President of Research at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. And if you're curious about how a research study gets its start, or how many studies are actually funded by the MS Society, or how many millions of dollars the MS Society invests in research, or what the research priorities are that the MS Society is investing in, then you're going to want to hear what Dr. Bebo has to say. But before we get to that conversation, we learned some other things over the past week. Last week, President Trump issued 2 executive orders that will impact the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. So what does this all mean for families and individuals living with multiple sclerosis who buy their health insurance on their state's health insurance exchange? Well, it means a couple of things, neither of which is very good news. First off, one of the executive orders federal agencies to help healthy individuals find less expensive insurance plans that offer much more limited coverage. These health insurance plans would not have to cover people with pre-existing conditions, for instance. So who would they appeal to? Well, they'd appeal to healthy young people who hardly ever get sick, so they don't want to spend too much money on health insurance. And if those healthy young people are steered in the direction of these new cheap policies, the people who do have pre-existing conditions, the people who are more expensive to treat, well, when they purchase their plans through their state exchanges, those insurance companies offering the plans are going to be forced to raise the prices of those policies. You know, insurance policy premiums are based on a pool of people being insured. And that pool is usually made up of a combination of people with relatively good health and people with not so good health. And so the prices kind of average out. But if you take all the people with good health and give them a cheap, no frills, not much coverage kind of policy, the only people left in the pool now are people who require a lot of care. So the prices of the policies for those people, the policies that those people have to buy on the exchanges, those prices continue to rise. And they start looking like the high-risk pools that we used to have that never really work and quickly price themselves out of the market. So that's one executive order. The other executive order that was signed last week eliminated the subsidies that insurance companies receive from the federal government to offset the actual out-of-pocket costs of many medical procedures. Now, these are not the subsidies that individuals receive to help lower their premiums. That's an important distinction to make. But these subsidies matter a lot to insurance companies. They're worth about $7 billion a year, and that $7 billion just got taken away. And to insurance companies, that represents what they like to refer to as market instability. And instability is a word that insurance companies hate. So it's likely that in 2019, some of those companies are either going to have to price their policies much higher because they won't be receiving those subsidies, or simply discontinue coverage in some states because they can't tolerate that level of market instability. To the MS community, these changes threaten the continuity of coverage. They threaten the basic affordability of health insurance, neither of which is a good thing. So it's important to know how these new changes to our health insurance system are likely going to affect us in the months and years ahead. Last week, California Governor Jerry Brown signed Senate Bill 17 into law, and this is very good news for the MS community. This bill requires pharmaceutical companies to notify health insurance companies and government health plans like Medi-Cal at least 60 days before scheduled prescription drug price increases that would exceed 16% over a 2-year period. And it would also force drug companies to explain the reasons behind those increases. So this is the first real step toward gaining some transparency in prescription drug price increases. And that's something that's incredibly important to the MS community because we've seen the cost of MS prescription medication just skyrocket. According to the National MS Society, the annual cost of MS medication in 2004 was $16,000. By 2016, the cost of that medication had risen to $78,000 a year. So the need for some sort of accountability and understanding behind these huge price increases should be obvious. And hopefully, this new law is going to serve as a sort of blueprint for other states so that the same level of common sense accountability can be extended everywhere. We'll be watching. Not last week, but next week, there is an amazing webcast that I want to tell you about and let you know where you can register to see it. Next week, specifically on October 25th, there will be a webcast that's being done live from ECTRIMS in Paris. Now, ECTRIMS is the largest conference in the world dedicated to MS research. And in next week's webcast, you're going to get a live update from 3 amazing scientists who are leading breakthrough research in the progressive MS arena. To find out more and register for the webcast, you can visit the National MS Society website at www.nationalmssociety.org. And speaking of the National MS Society, in a moment, my guest, Dr. Bruce Bebo, the Executive Vice President of Research at the National MS Society, will be with us, and we're going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how MS research actually happens. My guest today is Bruce Bebo, and Bruce is the Executive Vice President of Research at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. So, Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be with you, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I know today you're already known for the very important role that you play in multiple sclerosis research, but Bruce, how did it all begin? How did you get started in MS research?
Sure, I'm happy to share that story with you. I was inspired to pursue a career in MS research by my mother, who was diagnosed over 30 years ago when I was a teenager. And my mom was diagnosed with primary progressive MS, and I watched her as she progressed from using a cane to crutches to a wheelchair in just a few short years. And at that time, there really was nothing available that could alter the course of her disease or, honestly, even make life a little bit easier for her, which was a situation that I found personally unacceptable. So that's why I decided to dedicate my life to finding solutions for my mom and for others that are living with MS. And my roles have changed over the years. First, I was a graduate student, and I worked, day and night like a lot of graduate students to try to discover something about MS that might lead to a breakthrough for my mom. And next, as a society-funded postdoctoral fellow, I was focused on trying to figure out ways to turn off the disease-causing immune system. And while I was doing that, I also enjoyed serving as a volunteer for my local chapter of the MS Society in Oregon. At first, I was a rider and a team captain for their fundraising event, the MS 150, and then later as a member of the board of directors for the local chapter. And John, now I have the great privilege of leading the Society's research programs. And in this role, my job is to make sure that the research investments we're making, the investments that are made possible by the hard work and generosity of all of our supporters, are directed in the smartest and in the most impactful way possible, so that one day, hopefully soon, we'll have a cure for MS.
I have to thank you for following up on your initial inspiration as a teenager. I think what you felt is something an awful lot of family members feel when a loved one is diagnosed with MS, and when they see the disease progress, especially, you want to go out there and find the cure, and you're actually out there doing it and making sure that you're the engine behind others who are doing it as well. So that's an extraordinary story. I don't know how many people are really aware of the breadth and depth of the, I guess what we can call the research portfolio that the National MS Society has. How many requests for funding various research studies would you say that the Society typically receives?
So we have 2 grant application deadlines a year, one in the fall and one in the spring, and most of our proposals, so most of the proposals we receive are submitted in response to these 2 deadlines. And this year, John, we'll evaluate over 600 grant and fellowship applications. And we have the Society has a rigorous, characterized as highly regarded and well-established process for reviewing the applications and making funding decisions. And just share that with you real quick, John. The process we use has 4 stages. So the first stage is really engaging scientific experts to help the Society evaluate I call it the technical merit of the applications and the relevance of the proposed work to MS. Then we have another committee that provides oversight of this peer review process and makes recommendations to the Society for funding based on the Society's research priorities and based on our current research portfolio. And this is a committee that's composed not only of real senior scientific experts, but also of people living with MS, so that we're making sure we're funding research that has a high priority for the people who support us and honestly for the people that have the most to gain from us making smart decisions. The authorization to make research investments is made by our CEO after consideration of the outcomes from the technical review and the oversight. And then I just finally add that once we've made a decision to fund a project, our engagement isn't over. We require and receive regular reports of the scientific progress and financial accounting, and these are reviewed by the research staff at the Society to make sure that the projects are proceeding according to plan. I'd say a growing number of our projects are milestone-based, and payments are contingent on making satisfactory progress.
So that takes us through what happens once you receive a request for funding one of these studies. But I'm just curious to just take it back to the very beginning. Where do these requests come from? I mean, where does research actually begin?
Yeah, great question. So the Society, we accept applications from scientists mostly working in universities and from around the globe So our funding decisions are made really agnostic of geography, because people with MS don't really care where the cure for MS comes from. And just out of curiosity, the last time I looked, about 10% of the active projects in our portfolio are from institutions outside of the United States. And the inspiration for new research projects usually comes from a scientist reading the scientific literature. So this is where scientists publish and report their research findings. It comes from listening to other scientists that present their ideas at scientific meetings, sometimes from more informal interactions. This can even be the restaurant or a bar at a meeting hotel. And it's maybe this is a good time to also mention that, in addition to funding grants, the Society supports convening activities to provide opportunities for scientists to share their latest results and network and develop collaborations. I know, John, you've been to some of those meetings, so you've sort of seen that firsthand.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious, in round ballpark numbers, how many active research projects would you say the MS Society is currently invested in?
So as you mentioned, we think of our investments as a portfolio. So we have a diverse portfolio of research and includes about 360 active research projects. And I anticipate your next question, which would be, what our funding is. And our current annual investment in MS research exceeds $40 million. And you might be interested to hear that the Society began in 1946 and made its first research investment in 1947. And since that time, we've invested over $900 million in MS research. We helped to launch the careers of pretty much every MS expert, and I feel confident in saying that the tremendous advances we've made in MS treatments and improvement we're seeing in the quality of life for people living with MS, especially since the time my mom was diagnosed. These are really direct results of the robust investment we've made over the last 70 years or so.
That is an amazing number. 900 million over the lifetime of the Society to date, and $40 million investment a year. I think that's amazing. Especially, I know an awful lot of people may occasionally hear something in the news about a particular research study and come away thinking, well, that's the project the MS Society is working on, not realizing that you go through 600 proposals a year and the investment is considerable.
Yep,
wow.
That's a good adjective.
So I know that the MS Society has identified some key research priority areas that you particularly want research focused in. What are some of the most important questions that the Society is hoping to find the answers to?
So you mentioned we did have some research priorities. We engaged with both the scientific community and extensively with people living with MS to identify the highest priority questions in MS research. And we're focusing our investments in these priority areas. And so let's share those with you. The first priority area really is to try to answer the question, why me? Why does one person get MS and another person doesn't get MS? And the way we're going to try to answer that question is to define the contribution of genetics, environmental risk factors, and other modifiers to the risk for developing MS. And how those things, genetics and risk factors and exposures to environmental triggers, how that affects the course of disease, and using that knowledge to develop strategies to hopefully prevent MS from occurring in the first place, and certainly help us understand or come to better treatment and eventually cure for all forms of MS. The second question really is trying to understand, what causes the damage to the nervous system? And it's really about, this priority area is really about understanding the pathways that lead to the damage of the nervous system. A lot of work in this area involves trying to understand the immune reaction that happens both inside and outside of the nervous system. And understanding those pathways better will certainly lead us to understanding of the cause of MS. And of course, you need to understand the cause of disease in order to be able to develop better treatments and a cure. The third priority area is trying to answer the question, how do we stop MS in its tracks? How do we stop progression of disability? We're going to answer these questions by a better understanding of the processes that lead to the progressive form of MS and the development of treatments that address MS disability progression. The fourth question we want to answer is, how do we fix it? I mean, for people who are in, let's say, a more advanced stage of their disease, we need to figure out not only how to stop MS in its tracks, but how to restore lost function or how to fix MS. And this really involves, we're going to answer this question and solve this puzzle by understanding the processes that lead to neurodegeneration and developing strategies to protect the nervous system from damage. A lot of research now focused on how we can repair the myelin sheath, which is the target of the immune response in MS, and what leads to a lot of disability. There have been tremendous advances in myelin repair in the last few years, and a lot of research in that area that will really help to answer that question of how we can restore lost function, or how we can fix the nervous system. And the final priority area, the final priority question we're trying to ask is how can you thrive with MS? Until the day that we have a cure, what are some things that you can do to have a better quality of life, to live your best life with MS? And to answer these questions, we'll be focused on, or are focused on, looking at the cause of symptoms of MS and strategies for alleviating some of those symptoms. We're looking at the effect of if you have MS and other diseases, let's say like cardiovascular disease or diabetes. I mean, how that impacts progression and how we might be able to slow down and increase a person's ability to thrive with MS. We're looking at rehabilitation, at wellness behaviors and lifestyle approaches, things people can do now to impact the disease course, their symptoms, and their overall health. So those are the five questions we're really focused on, and a little bit about how we are working towards answering those questions.
5 sounds like a small number, but my goodness, I could not imagine anything that's been left out here. You guys have clearly covered all the bases that people who are living with MS would want to make sure someone's looking at. That's an incredibly comprehensive list.
Well, again, it was developed with about a year's worth of engagement with the scientific community, and also, again, with people living with MS to make sure we're answering those questions that people with MS want answers to. And because, these are the people that we work for. We would not be here if there was no MS. And John, I would happily go find another job, and will happily go find another job once we've solved this puzzle of MS.
Well, I think that's a good opportunity for us to kind of wrap up. I know you're busy, and I appreciate you spending the time, but I must say that I, and probably most everyone who will listen to our conversation, really looks forward to your pending unemployment coming sooner rather than later, Bruce.
Well, I'll be popping the champagne corks with you when that day happens, for sure.
Absolutely. I look forward to toasting your next career path, because there's nothing left to answer in the MS arena. That'll be quite a day.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. And I hope at some point in the future we can check in again and kind of get an update on some of the latest research that the Society is working on.
Sounds great, John. Look forward to it.
And that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Real Talk MS. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, I'd appreciate it if you could take just a minute to head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. I'm John Strum. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.